Thank you for joining me for another chapter of There's a Pirate in the Family. I hope you enjoyed today's adventure as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. Chapter the 6th of Mai Li reveals knowledge from the 8 books of fate and wisdom. William watched the light wagon as they pulled away from the shop. Jessica handled the mare and harness quite well, and Mai Li, with her ever-present bamboo staff, sat on her right with young William between them. Young William was waving to his father with a broad smile, showing the joy of being allowed to go on his first trip to Bristol. Jessica decided to go into town for some supplies and purchase new cloth for clothing for her and young William. He was growing so fast he needed new clothes almost every week or so, it seemed. Mai Li was quite an accomplished seamstress. She could see a dress in a shop, come home and sew it up. Sometimes she would even improve the design to be more comfortable while maintaining the style. She was quite a wonder. Jessica had come to love her like a sister, and she believed Mai Li felt the same about her. They talked and exchanged confidences just like 2 English girls. Mai Li's English improved drastically, but outside the family she still used the mask of a servant and spoke in her old broken English-Chinese mix. She could read and write as well as Jessica and was teaching young William his lessons in Chinese in addition to those in Latin he received from the village priest. Lord Braithwaite's gentleman, a former sergeant-at-arms, had been chosen for young William's martial training. On Will's 7th birthday, he started learning to march and drill. This was followed later by footwork drills of the sword, taught just a little at a time, so he considered it a game. Mai Li watched these efforts from time to time, and at the end of the one lesson approached the old gentleman. Please to explain purpose of? She executed a footwork pattern. Is this fighting method? The old gentleman picked up a sword and did the footwork drill, showing how the pattern fits with the sword. Mai Li smiled, bowed, and thanked the gentleman, and decided the time had come for her to pass on her father's knowledge from the 8 books of fate and wisdom. Mai Li told young William she wished him to learn a dance with her. He asked what kind of dance it was, and Mai Li told him, "We will learn to dance like the animals. You can dance like a tiger or a snake, maybe a crane. You know the birds with the long legs and long beaks that hunt frogs among the reeds. You will learn the dance of the dragon." And so young William's training in White Tiger Chuan Fa began. As Mai Li bumped along, lost in her thoughts, she saw young William in her mind moving in the dance of the tiger and crane. He moved well and showed great promise in the eyes of Mai Li. Her father trained and passed on the knowledge to only one person, Mai Li. When young William was a little older, she would teach him the combat application of the dance. By then his body would be trained and willing to understand. She knew this would give him a better chance to survive in this dangerous world. They reached Bristol and spent a wonderful day visiting the shops. Jessica had tea with an old friend from her childhood, while Mai Li took young William to spend his halfpenny. He had trouble deciding exactly what he wanted. It took him some time to find what was to his almost 9-year-old eyes were the bargain of a lifetime. It was about 4 in the afternoon when the wind changed and began to get cool. Jessica, sitting with her friend, decided they should be on their way back, so she drove the wagon to the main street and found Mai Li and young William. With their purchases tied and well secured, they set toward home. The breeze had cooled but was still pleasant, and they talked about the dresses they would make. Young William crawled to the back and began to enjoy some of the licorice candies he purchased. Mai Li gave him only a few and set aside the rest for later, telling him too many would give him tummy problems he didn't want. She laughed at the face he made. They traveled for about half an hour, and at a small stream they stopped for a cool drink and allowed the horse to rest and have some water. Will found the water full of frog spawn, and soon he was splashing around trying to catch them. Mai Li heard them first, and then the mare perked up her ears and let out a whinny. Another horse not too far away answered her. The 2 young women, one dressed as a boy, looked at each with only a bit of apprehension. The roads were usually safe these days, and this road was less dangerous as it was well traveled by the king's guardsmen. They mounted the wagon and headed toward the other horses. It was useless to do anything else. Because of the mare, whoever it was knew they were there and would have to pass right by them. They traversed the stream and pulled up onto the roadway. On the side of the road ahead, under a large willow, 3 rather rough-looking young men sat on ill-fed horses. They showed no badge or recognizable colors and didn't have the look of merchants. and no self-respecting farmers would have horses like these. The two women thought for sure they were highwaymen and meant them no good. Mai Li quickly decided. She told Jessica to slow down and take her time coming abreast of the men. Meantime, she moved to the back and pushed Will into the storage area under the seat and sat a heavy box in front of him for protection. She took her bamboo staff and began to push and twist the carvings. About a third of the way from the top, the shaft came apart and Mai Li withdrew a rather lethal-looking, narrow steel blade about a half-meter long and sharp on both sides. She turned it around, mounted it into the bamboo shaft, and twisted a carved symbol, locking the blade into place. She tied a rope around her waist and then to the back of the seat above where young William lay. She knew she could easily keep them safe unless these men were armed with pistols. Then it would be a bit more difficult. As they approached, the men rode out in front of them, pulled swords, and began brandishing them, trying to stop the women. "Go to the whip!" Mai Li yelled at Jessica. The mare split the men and put them into the chase. When the first man moved in to try to grab the wagon, Mai Li lifted her lance-like weapon and dispatched him from his horse with several quick cuts to the front of his chest. The next ruffian was just as stupid. He tried to mount the wagon by placing one hand on the sideboard. He leaned off his horse and tried to gain access, but when the wheel on that side bounded over a bump in the road, the sideboard of the wagon bounced up, caught him just under the chin, and sent him sprawling into the dust. The third fellow, seeing the long blade in Mai Li's hands and poor luck of his companions, decided this was not turning out to be the easy pickings they thought it would be, and dropped back to see about his bleeding friends. Mai Li again moved the carvings on the staff, and after cleaning the blade with an enclosed cloth, returned the blade to the bamboo staff, which once again looked harmless. Jessica looked at Mai Li and wondered if she would ever fully know this woman who had become her sister. Mai Li could see the question in Jessica's eyes and said, "You are my family now, so I will tell you of my father's knowledge. When I explain, I hope you will understand why I have not spoken of this before, but please let us be home and all together, and then I will." Nothing else was said until late in the evening after supper had been eaten and dishes cleaned. Young William sat on his father's lap, watching him work on a model of a new block and tackle set. Its improved strength will handle heavier cargo. "Do you see where I have added a roll of sheet steel?" his father said as he pointed at the model. The fire was glowing red and warm on this cool October evening. Mai Li stood, picked up her staff, and sat down on the floor in the middle of the room. Everyone watched as she pushed one of the carved symbols and then twisted the ugly old bamboo staff. A section of the staff broke down into several hollow round tubes with caps that slid into place and locked. The sections were held by another piece of the carved design that slid into place and locked the staff together. She started at the top and showed William the long blade she had so skillfully used that afternoon, Jessica having already related to William their adventure of the day. Even though he thought he knew the answer, William asked, "Where did you learn this?" "From my father and my grandfather, who in his younger years studied with the Buddhist monks of the Shaolin. He was taught combat and the healing arts with much knowledge of plants. My grandfather chose not to be a monk, and after he left the temple established an apothecary. When my father was born, he was taught by his father, who kept the practice until his death. Neither my grandfather nor my father taught the combat arts to anyone outside the family. My grandfather taught them only to my father, and my father, not having a son, taught them only to me." She opened the second section of her staff and pulled from it a long, narrow cloth bag tied with a drawstring. She untied the cord and reverently opened the top of the beautifully embroidered bag. She drew from the bag a scroll made from carved ivory pieces linked together with gold fastenings. They were a beautiful dark tea color from age and quite a masterpiece of craftsmanship. Each piece looked to be approximately 1 inch wide and 9 inches long. The Chinese characters were carved completely through the ivory like a stencil William used to mark shipping boxes. "These are the books, the 8 books of fate and wisdom handed down to me by my father. They contained all the knowledge that my grandfather learned from the Shaolin. He made these in secret as it was forbidden to write the knowledge. This is the first of 3 scrolls I have. These contain the knowledge of herbs and plants and their medicinal properties and how they will balance the qi, or life force, and heal or keep a person healthy. They also cover moxibustion and needle medicine treatment. You know of my tea and my gathering of herbs from the fields. This scroll contains that knowledge. I shared only the knowledge I could keep you safe and civilized as my father would have done. The knowledge of the second two scrolls was to be kept in my family. Now that you are my family, I feel I should offer you this knowledge. I think you will understand the value of young William, and you will further understand some of what he already knows. The animal dances he has performed for you before the hearth fire at night have significant combat value, as does my staff. I hope you will allow me to continue training young William. You know that I would never harm him or allow him to come to harm under my care. This is important knowledge for him to carry in this dangerous world. William, of course, had eyes only for the blade of Mai Li's staff, admiring the steel. Mai Li saw William's admiration of the blade and said, "I will share the knowledge of the books with you, William, if you have an interest in this blade." "You mean the method of making swords like this is in those scrolls?" asked William. "Yes, that and many other weapons of war and the methods of both armed and unarmed combat," answered Mai Li. William was no longer listening. War didn't interest him, steel did. Mai Li also told William, "I have 2 additional paper books written by ancient scholars. These books cost my father many pieces of gold. One is called, in your words, Heaven Carts and Other Machines of the Sang, written centuries ago by a man called Shang Hing. The second book is by a man named Su Sang, and the book describes what you would call a world clock. My father thought these books of great value and told me to guard them well, and I have done so. The reason I was being beaten the day you bought me was that I would not give them to the slave master. He found I had the books wrapped with my clothes and tried to take them. I would not let him." From her small bag, she took 2 leather-wrapped packages and removed 2 small silk-wrapped bundles. She carefully untied the silk cord and opened the silk covering to show the books. William looked at the 2 books and the drawings within and noticed some designs for water wheels and power transmission systems. But the book was in Chinese, and so he handed it back to Mai Li and again picked up the blade with the beautiful powder gray finish. When he tested the edge, it cut his finger, and "Bloody hell," he said, and sucked his finger. "Will you show me how to make this steel?" William drifted into thought, wondering how this wonderful blade could be made. "Of course, you are my family. I will help you in any way possible." Since no one told her not to, Mai Li continued to train young William as her father taught her. When young William, now Will to everyone, was 13 years of age, Mai Li decided it was time for the second level of his training from the books. She would begin to teach him the true meaning of the dances he had practiced with her for many years. Will loved his time together with Mai Li and obeyed her, first out of love and second out of the knowledge that what she was doing was for him. He knew that what she was teaching him would somehow benefit his future, even if he didn't always understand exactly how. He had questioned her often at first, but gradually settled into acceptance. He would admit it even to himself. He really enjoyed these moving meditations and animal dances, as Mai Li called them. But, most of all, he loved her, almost as much as he loved his mother, and he would have done anything she asked. If she asked him to stand on his head, he would do so without question. Today, instead of taking the standard starting position for the first dance, Mai Li rolled out several sections of woven mat onto the grass and then stood in the middle of the mat and beckoned for Will to join her. She bowed and Will returned the bow. He knew the lesson had begun and knew deep down inside that something new was about to be revealed. He could barely contain his excitement. "You remember the part of the dance where your hands fly up? You drop quickly, step forward, turn your body, and then drop to your knee?" Mai Li asked. Will nodded and wondered if he would finally begin to learn the things Mai Li did when he or his family were in danger. The knowledge of the books was all she would ever say in explanation when Will asked questions. He had seen her stop 4 grown men from harming or placing hands on his mother. She handled them as simply as she would 4 unruly children. They had walked away, leaving the 4 men on the ground clutching themselves and moaning. One was screaming about a broken arm. Mai Li told Will to grasp her wrist tightly. Will was now a good-sized boy and well-muscled from hours working with his father in the shop. After taking hold of Mai Li's wrist, he was quite surprised to find himself flat on his back with Mai Li kneeling on his chest, her open hands striking down on his nose just hard enough to water his eyes. She stood, pulling him to his feet, and began to explain the method of what she'd done and how it related to the patterns in the dances he had been practicing for so many years. She showed him 3 more, what Will in his mind had named tricks. Mai Li said that each trick had a strange name to help one remember the technique and its application in combat. The first one was called Rising Dragon, and as always, she told him never to abuse or reveal the source of his knowledge. 2 days later, Mai Li said, "Do you remember the section of the dance where you drop to your right into a low stance while striking with a left downward claw? Then you slide stance back to the same position, turn and kneel on your right knee?" Will did and executed that portion of the dance. Next, Mai Li had him grab her from behind in a bear hug, pinning her arms to her side. Again, in a heartbeat, Will was on his back. After pulling him to his feet, she went through the move slowly to let him see how the pattern of the dance was executed to defend against an attacker that grabs from behind. Will executed the move until he could take her off her feet as effectively as she had done to him. For the next year, Will learned the hidden combat applications of the dance of the tiger, crane, dance of the book, and other techniques from the dances with no name, only numbers. He now knew each dance was made up of tricks or patterns whose meaning and function only he and Mai Li knew. Mai Li showed him how to lock the joints, even to dislocate and to manipulate an opponent's body by controlling his balance. She showed him the power patterns and striking points required to obtain effective results from strikes. For the next year, 3 days a week, they would walk to the back of the acreage to the practice area where Mai Li, with Will's help, built a small training temple. Each day she would remove a scroll and choose a trick from the lists for Will to learn. He could take a rubbing from that section of the scrolls to create his own copy. He guarded these well, knowing that even if found by someone who could read Chinese, no one besides him or Mai Li would know what the inscribed characters for thundering hammers or the spider captures its prey would mean. Even with the inscribed description of the move and a reference to what a slide kick or an outward wrist turn were, these bits of paper would be useless if stolen. Will thought about creating a reference like the scrolls for his own use from something other than bits of paper, metal perhaps, which was always at hand. Soon he was carving the Chinese names onto pewter plates almost the same size as the original ivory ones. He inscribed them in Chinese with an English translation. Will asked Mai Li to help him make a staff like hers. He decided he would build a tube-shaped waterproof tin box that would fit inside his new staff. Will's father had taught his son to make waterproof tin-lined boxes that he made to fill contracts for the merchants. Waterproof box construction was a skill greatly in demand among the merchants in Bristol. Will never exactly explained to his father how he applied this skill outside his father's smithy. However, he knew his father wouldn't object. As part of his education as a gentleman, Will was also trained in traditional British martial training with a retired sergeant-at-arms that his lordship had recommended. Soon he outstripped the abilities of his aging teacher, and in competition among his peers he had no equal when it came to the sword. In wrestling, he had never been forced to submit even by the largest of opponents, including a guest instructor who was a 6-foot, 230-pound Marine sergeant who challenged Will to a wrestling match after seeing him beat everyone in the class. Will disliked hurting people, but the Marine was so stubborn he had to apply enough pressure to break the man's wrist before he would submit. The man became one of Will's best friends after the incident. Will, with Mai Li's help, began to translate the portion of the scrolls relating to the making of weapons. Will's father sought only to learn the methods described for making sword steel and was soon experimenting with the techniques laid out in the scrolls and Will's translated notes. He followed the method of folding steel described, including the strange note about how to use straw during the folding process. William understood this and put back in some of the carbon that had been removed by the blast furnace. Within a fortnight, he had produced his first sword steel. With his water-powered tilt hammer and using several laborers to fold and work the steel, he was able to turn out blades much faster than the Chinese. William made his first sword patterned after the presentation dress sword given to him by Lord Braithwaite. The new blade fits nicely into the handle and can be worn in the beautiful gold and mother-of-pearl sheath. Will fashioned his sword to fit the sheath from his lordship's gift. The blade followed the design of the oak practice sword carved for him by Mai Li. He also altered the grip of the presentation sword using tanned stingray skin on the grip to make it rough so it would not slip when hands were wet from perspiration during combat. Soon both Will and his father had new well-balanced swords, now as deadly as they were beautiful. Will's blade had a double edge most of the length of the blade, whereas his father's followed more traditional lines. Both men followed Mai Li's advice and adjusted the length of their swords to the length of their arms, making them most advantageous. Both Will and his father agreed not to produce any swords other than for their own use. Mai Li agreed to allow William to apply the knowledge of the books to make steel for commercial uses. Soon, William was using the new steel in tool designs, making the application lighter and stronger. Will found additional uses and soon had a new blade made for his staff. He also produced very thin sheets of the same steel to wrap around a section of his staff that now deflected strikes from swords without even leaving a mark. Will's staff was made of oak, not bamboo. Even though a bit heavier, he could still use it with great speed. He had been practicing with a similar oak staff for years, only without the deadly blade hidden inside. Thank you for joining me for another chapter of There's a Pirate in the Family. I hope you enjoyed today's adventure as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. If this story carried you away, made you smile, or kept you wondering what comes next, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and tap that notification bell so you never miss an episode. And I truly want to hear from you. Tell me where you're listening from and what part of the story captured your imagination today. Your comments help shape the journey ahead. Until next time, keep your compass steady, your curiosity sharp, and your heart open to adventure. This is There's a Pirate in the Family, and the voyage continues soon.